Hello, I've got one more review for November, and we have here The Enormous Egg by Oliver Butterworth. It is very, very much a kid's book, and the illustrations inside, black and white, are quite beautiful, and I believe the cover art was done by the same artist. So you see here a very, very, I guess you'd call it stereotypical, innocent art of a young boy with an egg that has hatched and a chicken going ballistic. On the back cover, you have got what came out of the egg. It's our Triceratops. Why would anyone be Team Triceratops? Well, maybe, like myself, they read The Enormous Egg when they were young. So this is one of my kids' books, and I have read it many times over the years. It's fun, it's light-hearted, it's naive, it's enjoyable. Not this specific book. My childhood book went the way of all books eventually, and this one finally, on this rereading, decided to part company with itself. Here's an example of some of the beautiful black and white line artwork throughout this book by Louis Darling. The front piece, for example, that's just gorgeous. This is the sort of thing that people hang on their walls. Anyhow, the author, Oliver Butterworth, was an American, mostly school teacher. Most of his life he was a school teacher, but he also wrote 4 books, of which The Enormous Egg is apparently the most famous. He was born in 1915, which I think is relevant to some of the reviews that I've heard about this book. Now, in The Enormous Egg, we start with Nate Twitchell, or as it starts, "My name is Nate Twitchell, but I can't help that." It's kind of a funny name, but I've had it for 12 years now, and I'm pretty much used to it. So Nate is in some part of New Hampshire, a small town called Freedom. Don't know if that's a real place or not. Pretty sure that New Hampshire is. And this was first published in 1950 something or other, 1956. I should really check these things first, shouldn't they? My copy is actually 1957. But this is thoroughly a 50s book. Written in the 50s, set in the 50s, I'm going to guess it feels 50-ish. So it's not a historical fiction book, it's an actual historical book. And when you think that it is now 2025, we are close to 100 years since this book was written. Consequently, some of the language and viewpoints may be a bit dated, but not that much. Oliver Butterworth must have been really pretty good in his viewpoints from the way he writes this. He was married, by the way, to a fellow teacher and a political activist. And I think that attitude of his throughout this book does come clear. Okay, so what happens here? Nate Twitchell is doing the chores around his family farm. It isn't a real farm. His father is the editor of the Freedom newspaper, but it doesn't bring in a lot of money, so they also have hens, a goat, and a little veggie garden. And he's tending to the hens one day when one of them lays this enormous egg. I wonder where they got that title. And it isn't a normal chicken egg, it isn't the right shape, and it's kind of leathery and ovoid. Another beautiful illustration here of the whole family gathered around it. There's Nate, there's the hen, there's the egg, his father, mother, and his younger sister Cynthia, who's about 10. And the egg's so large that the hen can't turn it, but she's sitting on it anyway, and he decides that he's going to do the turning for her and wait to see what's going to hatch out of it. And for the longest time, nothing does, but the whole family's invested and they're interested. And eventually, I think after 5 or 6 weeks, it does, in fact, hatch. But before that happens, Nate, while he's out fishing, encounters Dr. What is his name? It's a Dr. something. Dr. Was it Zimmer? It might have been Zimmer. Yeah, Zimmer. and he's talking about his chicken and his egg. And Dr. Zimmer asks to come and see it. And they have a look at it. And Dr. Zimmer's really excited by this egg. And he says to Nate, as soon as it hatches, I really want to know. I'm a visitor up here, but I'm staying with the McPhersons. And when the egg hatches, they do that. Now, at that point, they're still kind of the opinion that Dr. Zimmer means that he's a medical doctor, but in fact he isn't. He's a paleontologist. He recognized the egg from his own egg collection, and he is really, really excited when this tiny little, very, very cute Triceratops hatches out of it. There's a bit of a family conference when that happens. Everyone comes running, and they all look at it, and eventually they decide to name it after one of Nate's mother's uncles, Uncle Beasley. They notify Dr. Zimmer, who comes running in his pajamas. And Nate sits around taking care of this animal that eats a lot of grass. And it's all very exciting. Now, Dr. Zimmer gets in touch with all his professional friends back in Washington. And eventually they start coming around and looking at the egg. Uncle Beasley keeps growing, eating and growing. And at this point, I've also seen a lot of people say they were here for the dinosaur, but they got less dinosaur than Nate Twitchell. I was charmed by this book when I was young, and I'm still charmed by it now. In many regards, Oliver Butterworth was clearly one of those children's authors who makes books for children with the intention that adults can enjoy them too. Here's a picture of the original Uncle Beasley. And I feel that the artist, Louis Darling, really, really got into the spirit of it, and the drawings are very consistent with the whole feel of this book. Now, I would argue that the feel of this book is very much 50s American, naive phase of America. There's things in here that are far, far from contemporary, but charming. Now, up until this point, Nate's been rearing Uncle Beasley in New Hampshire, but it's starting to get winter, it's starting to get a bit cold, and Dr. Zimmer arranges it for it to go to Washington, D.C. and be housed in the museum. After this, and Nate goes with him as a keeper, and it's all very exciting. This is basically a boy's fun tale. Nate is 12 in grade 6, I think he said. And it is more about Nate and his experience than Dinosauria. Although, at one point, the author throws in a whole heap of actual dinosaur lore that would probably have been very suitable to a 12-year-old boy or girls reading back in the 50s. Anyhow, the entire paleontology and archaeology team of America get involved. Look at that drawing. Fantastic. And after the dinosaur moves to Washington, Nate takes him for walks around town to keep him in exercise. And one day there's this horrible event because Uncle Beasley doesn't really like car horns, and one goes off right in his ear, causing Dr. Beasley to overturn a truck. After that, it gets very... the stress element of the book that you have to have any good narrative, you need to have an event that needs to be overcome. Well, the event here is that Uncle Beasley gets in trouble. There's a huge push on the part of the politicians to get rid of the dinosaur. But it comes to naught, and Uncle Beasley is allowed to survive happily in the zoo with the American public taking care of him. So, this has been apparently a classic in children's literature ever since it was published in 1956. I know at least one person watching this has probably already read this, and has fond memories of it. As an adult rereading it, it is surprisingly suited, as I said, for an adult reader who enjoys things that were written in the 50s. Butterworth gets in a lot of sly digs at humanity and their attitudes. And he's clearly quite political. And well, the political things that he writes aren't out of the realms of something that a 12-year-old in the 50s at least would read with enjoyment, and they'd have a bit of a laugh at the funny bits. But the funny bits are all bits that have actual political or human observation components to them. So you've got heavily critical attitude towards consumerist society. For example, once the world finds out there's a dinosaur, a whole heap of people come up and try to buy him off Nate, who is its owner. And one person wants to use him to advertise old whiskey. And when Nate refuses to sell him the dinosaur to him, he gets really angry and says, well, what are you going to do with it? And Nate says, I'm not going to do anything with him. I just want to have him. Isn't it enough to just have something? Written in this beautiful reading diary, a present from my sister. Thank you. And later there's a lot of really quite cynical attitudes towards politicians and everything. So the moral of the story here is, I think, cute kids book, absolutely, in the 50s. I'm not sure how this would go for kids reading it today, because the world of the 50s is so far removed from today. You'd have to have a child that enjoyed reading in the past in a way that it seems that quite a few adults can't get. I did briefly hop onto Goodreads when I was adding it. One person thinks that the writing is a bit dry and disappointingly little dinosaur time. True enough. One person is calling it out of date and sexist, not to mention implausible. I don't know what they mean. Implausible? A triceratops from the late Jurassic hatching out of a chicken egg? I can't see anything implausible about that. Call me strange. I'll answer. Is it sexist? Yes, to an extent it's sexist. It is appropriate for the era of the 50s, and remembering that Butterworth was born before 1920. This is old. I didn't find it particularly sexist. It's old. I loved it when I was a kid. The fact that the main protagonist was male really didn't bother me. It was a great kids' adventure with a dinosaur, and I loved it. And honestly, I still love it. This is a book that I could continue to read, maybe not for a year or two, but I could definitely go back to this with just as much of enjoyment as I've ever had so far. So thank you for watching one more for #DieNovember. Why am I reading a kids book, you ask? Well, I actually read kids books quite often. Many of them are pretty cool, especially the older ones. But I'm also still reading The Dinosaur Heresies, which is why you don't have a review yet. This is some chunky stuff. I'm only halfway through. And as Robert Bakker takes down all the heresies of dinosauria orthodoxy, so I couldn't help noticing in The Enormous Egg in the 50s, they still thought of the dinosaurs as sluggish reptiles with slow metabolism. Fine, we're going to work on that. And the joints are interesting. The back legs of this Triceratops are portrayed in the rhino style, which is upright legs that move well, whereas the forearms are still positioned in more chameleon-like reptilian, which is largely disproved by the 80s. So, watch this space. I'm through parts 1 and 2. I'm starting part 3, and I hope to make it through by the end of the November. I mean, it's possible. It's a bit of a read. Thank you very much for watching. Read good books. Read good books about dinosaurs, because #DieNovember. Thanks for watching.